Okay, so we're starting with section 6, the Age of Reason and Revival, 1648 to 1789. Here it is. New section, new units. I'll read the little intro here and then we'll get into the actual chapter. The Age of Reformation was marked by debate among Christians about the way of salvation. The Age of Reason was highlighted by the denial of any supernatural elements in religion. Respect for science and human reason replaced the Christian faith as the cornerstone of Western culture. Many Protestants met this crisis of faith not by arguments, but by focusing on the experience of conversion. Faith was less dogma and more personal experience. The experiential Christianity spread rapidly by the power of preaching without governmental assistance, and many Christians came to see that state support was no longer essential for Christianity's survival. Christians began to conceive of the possibility of religious freedom. Wonderful idea. Okay, here we have a timeline, which I will probably actually put into the video. And Chapter 33, Aiming at the Foundations, the Cult of Reason. Here's that. Okay. Alrighty. If Americans believed in saints, Benjamin Franklin would be among them. He exemplified so many virtues Americans have come to admire. People found him practical, innovative, earthy, affable, witty, and above all, tolerant. People think that's a virtue now as well. Not everybody, but some people. Okay. A few weeks before he died, Ben, otherwise known as Benjamin, responded to an inquiry by President Ezra Stiles of Yale concerning his religious faith. Franklin said, "As to Jesus of Nazareth, I have some doubts as to his divinity, though it is a question I do not dogmatize upon, having never studied it, and think it needless to busy myself with it now, when I expect soon an opportunity of knowing the truth with less trouble. I see no harm, however, in its being believed, if faith has the good consequence of making his doctrines more respected and better observed." He was about to die, and I guess he figured it was fine to not have a strong opinion on that. Interesting. Something of the American spirit is there. It is the spirit of Franklin's era, the Age of Reason, 1648 to 1789. Questions of doctrine seemed unimportant, hardly worth fretting about. What was immensely more important was behavior. I have heard this. This actually reminds me of Richard Dawkins. He was on some podcast, and he was saying how bummed this is a paraphrase, but he was saying how bummed he is that like Christian culture is kind of leaving Europe. The Islamic religion is certainly moving into Europe because of migration. I think Christianity was kind of waning before that. But anyways, he was saying how he's bummed about it becoming a less Christian culture. Yet he's like spent his life trying to convince people Christianity isn't true. So there's this whole idea that like the belief part doesn't matter as long as it makes you act like a good person. It's like you actually need to believe, like the reason that people do things is because of what they believe to a large extent. I mean, basically completely, you could say. That might be a statement I need to actually defend more to say completely, but like you can't just get rid of the belief part. Anyway, that's a bigger topic, but all right. Okay, something of the American spirit is there. It is the spirit of Franklin's era, the Age of Reason, 1648 to 1789. Questions of doctrine seemed unimportant, hardly worth fretting about. What was immensely more important was behavior. Do our beliefs make us more tolerant, more respectful of those who differ with us, more responsive to the true spirit of Jesus? If that hatred of religious bigotry coupled with a devotion to tolerance of all religious opinions has a familiar ring, it is because the attitudes of the Age of Reason are not a thing of the past. They live on today in the values of the Western world. That's true. The Age of the Reformation proved again that faith and power are a potent brew. As long as Christians had access to power, they used it to compel conformity to the truth as they understood it, Catholic, Lutheran, or Reformed. So people died for their faith, tens of thousands of them, until something general but very deep in the human spirit awoke to revolt. We call that revolt the Age of Reason, or as some prefer, the Enlightenment. When, as Charles Williams put it, quotation, national interests and mental relaxations combine to exclude metaphysics from culture, end quote. The spirit of the Age of Reason. The spirit of the Age of Reason was nothing less than an intellectual revolution, a whole new way of looking at God. That's always nice. A whole new way of looking at God, the world, and oneself. It was the birth of secularism. The Middle Ages and the Reformation were centuries of faith in the sense that reason served faith, the mind submitted to authority. To a Catholic, it was church authority, to a Protestant, biblical authority. But in either case, God's word was primary and human thoughts were secondary. The essential concern in this life was preparation for the next. I think that's a good idea. The Age of Reason rejected that. In place of faith, it set reason. The primary concern was not the next life, but happiness and fulfillment in this one. I think that's a bad idea. Happiness and fulfillment in this one. And the mind, rather than faith or emotions or traditions or myths, was the best guide to happiness. I have found it to be sometimes the greatest way to not have happiness, by putting too much faith in yourself. Okay. Although it is also good to recognize that God made you. He made you with a brain, and you should probably use it. You can quote me on that. Anybody who sees this. All right. The spirit and purpose of the Enlightenment were eloquently expressed by one of its spokesmen, Baron von Holbach, who wrote, "Let us endeavor to disperse those clouds of ignorance, those mists of darkness which impede man on his journey, which prevent his marching through life with a firm and steady step. Let us try to inspire him with respect for his own reason, with an inextinguishable love of truth." That part, that's good. Love of truth is great. So that he may learn to know himself and no longer be duped by an imagination that has been led astray by authority. So that he may learn to base his morals on his own nature, his own wants, on the real advantage of society, so that he may learn to pursue his true happiness by promoting that of others, in short, so that he may become a virtuous and rational being who cannot fail to become happy. There are a lot of assumptions in that, but yeah, it's interesting. Okay, next section. Renaissance. How did this new spirit take root and grow? Its seeds probably lie in the Reformation era itself, in a movement historians call the Renaissance. The word means rebirth and refers to the recovery of the values of classical Greek and Roman civilization expressed in literature, politics, and the arts. Perhaps the best example of the rebirth of the classical spirit was Erasmus of Rotterdam, 1467 to 1536. In a series of best-selling satires highlighted by In Praise of Folly, Erasmus ridiculed monasticism and scholasticism by the use of irony, wit, and enlightened common sense. Erasmus's followers thought they heard a true reformer in him. He laid the egg, they said, that Luther hatched. But in 1524, a significant conflict between Luther and Erasmus erupted. In that year, Erasmus's diatribe on free will appeared. I wonder what that said. It made clear the cardinal difference between the two men. Luther believed that the human will was enslaved, totally unable, apart from grace, to love or serve God. But Erasmus considered this a dangerous doctrine since it threatened to relieve a person of his moral responsibility. What Luther regarded basic to biblical religion, Erasmus dismissed as inhumane. The difference in the Reformation and the Resistance lie right there in the view of humanity. The Reformers preached the original sin of humanity and looked upon the world as fallen under God's curse. The Renaissance had a positive estimate of human nature and the universe itself. This confidence in humanity flowered, and humanism filled the air with fragrance during the Enlightenment. Another root of the Enlightenment, running through the century, 1550 to 1650, consisted of the appalling religious conflicts, the English Civil War, the persecution of the French Huguenots, and the 30 Years' War in Germany. Common decency cried out against the power of fanatical clerics and princes and popes using religion as an excuse for warfare and cruelty. I don't know that they were always using it as an excuse. I think that maybe sometimes they were, but I think it was a lot of times them actually trying to defend what they believed was true. In at least some of the cases. All right. More and more people felt only disgust at the burning or drowning of an elderly woman accused of witchcraft or heresy. Religious prejudice seemed like a far greater danger than atheism, so a thirst for tolerance and truth common to all humanity spread. Finally, the age of reason sprang from the soil of a new faith in law and order. Modern science arose in the 16th and 17th centuries and filled people with visions of a new day of peace and harmony. These pioneers of modern science forced people to think in a new way about the universe. Copernicus, 1473 to 1543. The fact that I said Copernicus with no problem, by the way, is evidence that if you've actually heard the person's name a lot of times, it can be spelled any old weird way, which isn't really that weird actually, but it can be a weird name and you can still say it right. So maybe I need to just hear more history so that I can say more names correctly. All right, Copernicus, 1473 to 1543, who insisted that the sun, not the earth, is the center of our universe. Little did he know, there are lots of suns. All right, there's John Kepler, 1571 to 1630, who concluded that the sun emits a magnetic force that moves the planets in their courses. And Galileo, however you say that, Galileo, 15, and his last name after him, 1564 to 1642, who made a telescope to examine the planets and proved that the acceleration of falling bodies is constant. He also went blind after a while from always looking through his telescope. All right, all of these discoveries, however, had to be united into one all-embracing principle that would explain the motion of bodies in the heavens and present the universe as one great machine operating according to unalterable laws. This was the feat of the most illustrious scientist of the Age of Reason, Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727. He was actually a pretty cool guy, in my opinion. All right. In 1687, Newton published his momentous work, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, in which all laws of motion in the heavens and on the earth are harmonized in a master principle for the universe, the law of gravitation. And here we have a picture and the next section. Okay, the next section is the wonder of the world machine. This is Newton's world machine. All right, the reading public of Europe was captivated by the wonder of Newton's world machine. The medieval world of unseen spirits, angels, and demons seemed less plausible or even superstitious. In its place moved a universe subject to physical laws, expressed in mathematical symbols. While Newton himself did not disparage belief in God, indeed, he considered his findings discoveries of God's creation, not human inventions. He's right. Others of the Enlightenment placed their faith in the new scientific model, where the sun displaced the earth as the center, and where humanity was displaced as the crowning apex of creation in the center of God's world. Some even felt that God had been displaced as well. God seemed less necessary when one observed that the world operated by discernible laws. They're not thinking deeply. Anyway, all right. This was this vast unfolding universe filled some with dismay. Blaise Pascal, 1632 to 1662, a French physicist, recoiled before, quotation marks, the terrifying expanses which engulf us as a fleeting atom, end quote. I feel like I relate to the dramaticism of his feelings on this. It's not really dramatic, it's legit, but that's legit if you don't know, if you don't have God, or you don't know, you don't have a belief in God, then of course it's and especially if you're thinking about God. Anyways, all right, but others accepted it as an invitation to discover the secrets of cosmic existence. Alexander Pope wrote, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, 'Let Newton be,' and all was light." This sudden access to the mysteries of the universe seemed to magnify the role of human reason. If the universe is a smooth-running machine with all its parts coordinated by one grand design, then we only have to think clearly to find life's meaning and true happiness. So they found that the earth had design, and they were like, okay, we don't need God now, even though Nowadays, one of the main arguments for God's existence is that the universe makes sense, is the design. It's kind of interesting. All right. It says, if the universe is a smooth running machine with all its parts coordinated by one grand design, then we only have to think clearly to find life's meaning and true happiness. The fundamental idea that we have the ability to find the truth by use of our senses and reason gave rise to the label Age of Reason. The term should not suggest that every blacksmith and village priest suddenly assumed the airs of an intellectual. Many Christians lived and died in the faith of their fathers, totally unconscious that a new age had dawned, but the outlook and direction of Europe had changed. Christianity could scarcely escape the fallout from this intellectual revolution. For 1,200 years, Augustine's ideas had ruled Christendom. I want to read some of Augustine's books. I have not done that, and I would like to. People were enslaved sinners who needed, above all else, the supernatural grace of God. To ensure the availability of this grace through the Christian church, God had ordained the powers of the state to protect truth and punish error. But now intellectuals were arguing something else. People are not just helpless sinners. They are reasonable creatures who just need knowledge and common sense more than God's grace. Those two are not mutually exclusive. Just want to say that. All right, Christians found themselves in two contrasting climates. At first, during the closing years of the 17th century, some believers, especially in England, tried to harmonize reason and faith. They argued that Christianity is totally reasonable, but some truths come by reason and some by revelation. Some things, like the existence of God, come by observing the heavens, while other things, like the resurrection of Christ, come by the witness of Scripture. In time, however, after the beginning of the 18th century, the climate changed. In France, confidence in reason soared, and Christians found that many intellectuals dismissed all appeals to revealed scripture as superstitious nonsense. The climate was more hostile. The best representative of the first generation is John Locke, 1632 to 1704. The highly influential philosopher never minimized the importance of belief. In his essay concerning human understanding, he not only shows how reason functions, he indicates that the existence of God is, quotation, the most obvious truth that reason discovers, end quote. Closer examination, however, shows that the God Locke had in mind has little in common with the God of Exodus or of Jesus' resurrection. Mystery is almost gone. Emotion and witness and the supernatural are unbecoming. Locke's God is the product of rational proof. To Locke's credit, he endorsed revelation and never doubts its importance. Fulfilled prophecies and the miracles of Jesus are proof of Jesus' authority. But what Scripture actually shows is that few dogmas are necessary, and these are simple and intelligible to ordinary men and women. Christianity has only one essential doctrine: Jesus is the Messiah. Most of traditional theology Locke dismisses as irrelevant. Locke also speaks for his generation in his emphasis on moral conduct. Christianity, he says, adds to its belief in Jesus as Messiah the imperative of a good life. Jesus often spoke of rewards and punishments for Christian behavior, and that too is entirely reasonable because reason shows that moral standards must be reinforced by strong incentives. Okay. Thus, according to Locke, revelation shows Christianity's reasonable character. Belief in Jesus as Messiah and then ethical behavior are all Jesus and the apostles required for righteousness. Both of these are basically rational. Okay. Next section. The rise of the radicals. This is a quotation and it's from the Bible. Ezekiel 18:2. It's also a quotation from the Bible that I'm not entirely sure I know what is meant by it. The parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And I'm wondering if what's meant by that is, anybody comment and tell me what it actually means if you know, if I'm wrong. But I think it's parents eat sour grapes. The parents do the thing, but then the kids observe it. And in the same way that if you think too much about a lemon, your mouth could start to water, then the kids observing the parents do it gives them the effect of it even though they never did it. I don't know. Anyway, maybe I should ask ChatGPT sometime. Or somebody comment and tell me. But yeah, Ezekiel 18:2. The parents eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Many in the next generation, the first of the 18th century, felt fewer obligations to the Christian past. Many in the next generation the first of the 18th century, felt fewer obligations to the Christian past. So instead of trying to harmonize nature and scripture, they simply set aside revelation. Many intellectuals claimed that the parts of the Bible that agree with reason are clearly unnecessary. The parts that contradict reason, the myths, miracles, and priestly elements, are simply untrue. This most militant attitude against the faith was especially evident in France. In the 18th century, Paris arose as the capital of a new cosmopolitan culture. Ideas circulated freely throughout Europe, and the American colonies, to a degree unmatched before or since. The social and intellectual leaders of Europe were united in a community of thought and interests. In Paris, a group of thinkers and writers known as the philosophes brought the age of reason to its climax. The philosophes were not philosophers devoted to an academic discipline. They were literate students of society who analyzed its evils and advocated reform. They aimed to spread knowledge and emancipate the human spirit. Okay. Curiously enough, atheism was not at all fashionable in this polite society. Most of the prominent infidels, quotation, quote unquote, who ridiculed Christianity during the 18th century believed in a supreme being, but regarded it superstitious to hold that this being interfered with the world machine. This belief was called deism. Deism, like the watchmaker god. The god of the deists has sometimes been called the watchmaker god, who created the world as a watchmaker makes a watch and then winds it up and lets it run. Since God was a perfect watchmaker, there was no need for him to interfere with the world later. Hence, the deists rejected anything that seemed to be an interference or intervention of God with the world, such as miracles or a special revelation through the Bible. I don't think that the laws of science require at all for God to not intervene, because they're leaving out like completely that there's a spiritual world, and they're also leaving out that time is not linear. So technically, God could interfere like he did when he died, like when Jesus died, and it could have been done before the foundation of the world. So even if it was a wind-up clock thing, which it's not, it still could happen. So I'm not saying these guys are right. Like, I'm not actually defending what they're saying. I'm saying that what they're saying doesn't make sense. Also, I hope that I even explained that in a way that makes sense. I'm going to leave it at that, just in case I didn't explain it very well, and I'm just taking up time. All right. If somebody knows what I'm saying but wants to like say it better than I did in the comments, or wants to challenge it, feel free to do that. Hence, the deists rejected anything that seemed to be an interference or intervention of God with the world, such as miracles or special revelation through the Bible. The deists believed that their religion was the original religion of man. From it had come, by distortion, all other religions. These distortions were the works of priests who concocted the theologies, myths, and distinctive doctrines of the various religions to enhance their power. The most influential propagandist for deism was Voltaire, 1694 to 1778, who personified the skepticism of the French Enlightenment. Above all others, Voltaire popularized Newton's science, fought for personal liberty and freedom of the press, and spread the cult of reason. He turned out a prodigious number of workers, historians, plays, pamphlets, essays, and novelties. He was a very conscientious person. In his correspondence, estimated at 10,000 letters, he wittingly spread the virtues of the Enlightenment and scathingly attacked the abuses of his day. It's always bad when you have abuses of your day, and so then like good things get attached to those abuses. So like people get drawn in because some of what's being said is legit. It's like, yeah, this really is a problem, and then they like tie something else to it. The conclusion, what to do about that problem, is not right. Voltaire achieved his greatest fame as the most relentless critic of the established churches, Protestant and Catholic alike. He was sickened by the intolerance of organized Christianity and disgusted by the petty squabbles that seemed to monopolize the time of many priests and clergymen. Yet, in spite of his biting criticism of Christianity, his aim was not religion's destruction. He once said that if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent one. Voltaire had many disciples, but his only serious rival in spreading the gospel of deism was a set of books, a famous French encyclopedia edited by Denis Diderot, 1713 to 1784. The 17 volumes of the encyclopedia constituted the chief monument of the philosophies. They heralded the supremacy of the new science, championed tolerance, denounced superstition, and expounded the merits of deism. Diderot's article on Christianity professed high regard for the religion of Jesus, but its effect was to stir the readers to a profound contempt for Christianity's social failures. There's a lot of this wasn't that long ago, I guess, in this grand scheme of things, but a lot of stuff that I'm reading here is stuff that's still happening. Like what was said in the beginning, where he's like, hey, this is like still happening. We're still sort of in this age in a sense. It's like super relatable as far as like just listening to people, especially if you listen to a lot of YouTube like I do. Like all this stuff is still, these are still thoughts people are having. All right, unlike most previous critics of the church, the philosophers were not heretics or dissenters who attacked the church in the main name of Christ. These critics launched their attack from outside the church, and they aimed their missiles not at a single point of dogma, but at the foundation of all Christian truth. Their well-publicized purpose was to demolish the citadel itself. Next section, Christianity on trial. Christianity, they insisted, was a pernicious plot designed to turn the earth over to the oppressive powers of the priestly caste. Revealed religion was nothing less than a scheme to exploit the ignorant. Voltaire liked to refer to Christianity as the infamous thing, quote unquote. His most ruthless charge against the faith pictured the thousands upon thousands of victims of Christianity's intolerance. These intellectuals judged Christianity by the simple human standards of good and evil. If the church, in the name of purity of doctrine, sanctioned the bloody carnage of fellow Christians, as it had in the wars of religion, then Christianity, far from being sacred and holy, was a wicked institution. It prevented peace, harmony, and progress among the peoples of the earth. People still make this argument all this time later. The primary weapon aimed at the church was truth. We think, this is a quotation, we think that the greatest service to be done to men, said Diderot, is to teach them to use their reason, only to hold for truth what they have verified and proved. End quote. But the standards of truth ruled out Christian doctrine from the start. When the Orthodox tried to reason from their basic premises, the infidels only scoffed because they refused to allow arguments drawn from authority or tradition embodied in the Bible or the church. These simply were not reasonable. Appeals to miracles met with similar disdain. The proof of a position was found in reason or human experiences, and since miracles failed this test, they were dismissed as medieval nonsense. You see, Diderot argued, once one sets foot in this realm of the supernatural, there are no bounds. One doesn't know where one is going, nor what one may meet. Someone affirms to have 5,000 persons have been someone affirms that 5,000 persons have been fed with 5 small loaves. This is fine, but tomorrow another will assure you that he fed 5,000 people with 1 small loaf, and the following day a third will have fed 5,000 with the wind. End quote. Okay, but Diderot, whatever your name is, you know, people lie all the time, but does that mean everybody lies just because somebody lied? Somebody might lie. So Diderot, you're being silly. All right. The critics were thoroughly aware that they were fomenting a revolution in the fundamental belief of Europeans. Voltaire reported on each new triumph of reason over the church with the exaltation of a commander winning battles. The futility of empty confidence. These attacks on Christian convictions demanded a vigorous and well-reasoned response from Orthodox Christians. Unfortunately, in Catholic countries like France, the reaction was woefully inadequate. Church leaders were not indifferent to the rising tide of infidelity, but they tried to check it by traditional means. They appealed to secular authorities to censor dangerous books, but they were usually unfamiliar with the primary issues the scoffers raised. In England, it was different. Several individuals were effectively against deism, none more than Bishop Joseph Butler, 1692 to 1752. His monumental work, The Analogy of Religion, virtually ended the debate for thinking people. Skirmishes continued for years, but after Butler, it was clear the fundamental issues had been settled. I kind of want to read his book now, because, well, maybe it's not a full book, I don't know what it is, but The Analogy of Religion by Bishop Joseph Butler. I might look for that, because I wonder what his arguments against the deists were, since I just randomly sort of talked about it. The deists, with their confident optimism, assumed that they knew all about God's wisdom and purpose. They read it all in the pattern of nature. Butler, however, saw with disarming clarity that life is filled with perplexities and enigmas. He did not try to prove the existence of God. Deists never denied this premise, nor did he reject reason. He accepted it as man's natural light. But he did challenge reason. He did challenge reason's sovereignty. Reason, said Butler, provides no complete system of knowledge, and in ordinary life it can offer us only probabilities. Thus, Butler undermined deism's fortress, its confidence in reason. Nature, he said, is not a realm in which reason is supreme. It is filled with obscurities and unexplained mysteries. We meet perplexity at every turn. And if we meet problems in nature, should we be surprised if we encounter difficulties in religion? But take one further step. We know the ordinary course of nature because it is disclosed to us by experience, including our problems and perplexities. If religious truth encounters similar difficulties, isn't it reasonable to assume that one kind of knowledge is as dependable as the other? We normally act on the basis of probability. Why not in religion? Interesting idea. In the end, however, deism collapsed from its own weaknesses. It was based on a false optimism. It's based on lots of other false stuff too. It had no explanation for the evils and disasters of life because the laws of nature were clear and unalterable. Deists assumed that man's moral choices drawn from nature were also simple and unchanging. If asked, why don't people always see clearly the religious truths in nature? The deist could not respond with the lies of priestcraft, but that was too simplistic to be true, and few were convinced. The eventual rejection of deism, however, did not restore Christianity to a central place in the Western culture. The negative work of the Age of Reason endured. Modern culture, its art, its education, its politics, was freed from formal Christian influence. Nations had made a deliberate attempt to organize a religiously neutral civilization. This meant that faith was to function in the private realms, confined to church, home, and heart. This is what we find today in modern secular societies. This leaves Christians with a basic problem in the modern era. How far can believers go in trying, as citizens, to get the state to enforce Christian standards of conduct? Or if Christians give up the idea of enforcing Christian behavior, then what norm of conduct should they, as citizens, try to make an obligation for everyone? That is a good question. I think that when you're making laws, I'm making this up as I go along. By the way, that's the end of that chapter. Now for my off-the-cuff thought that I haven't thought through. Well, if you're faced with multiple options,